The glint of a knife pressed against her throat was the moment Lillian Norwood realized her life was about to change forever. It wasn't the first time she'd faced trouble in the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1875, but it was certainly the most dire. The shopkeeper's meaty fingers dug into her shoulder as he called for the sheriff, his voice booming across the crowded marketplace. "Thief! I caught this woman stealing from my store!" His accusation rang out, drawing the attention of every soul in the vicinity. The morning bustle of the marketplace came to an abrupt halt, all eyes turning toward the commotion. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled to maintain her composure. At 22, she had weathered many storms, but being falsely accused of theft in a town where justice was often swift and merciless terrified her to her core. "I paid for everything in my basket," she protested, her voice quavering despite her efforts to sound confident. The contents of her market basket lay scattered on the ground, a small sack of flour, a few apples, and a bolt of simple cotton fabric. Nothing extravagant, nothing worth stealing. "Check your ledger, Mr. Holloway. I gave you $2 just moments ago." The shopkeeper tightened his grip. "You paid for the flour and the apples, girl, but not for this." He yanked a silk handkerchief from her pocket, one she had never seen before. "Fine silk like this costs more than you make in a month. Thought you'd slip it into your pocket while I wasn't looking, did you?" "That isn't mine," Lillian insisted, her blue eyes widening with genuine confusion. "I've never seen it before in my life," the growing crowd murmured, most faces showing skepticism rather than sympathy. Lillian had been an outsider in Redemption Creek since arriving 6 months prior. A woman alone, taking odd jobs to survive, wasn't someone folks were quick to trust. "The sheriff will sort this out," Mr. Holloway declared, his knife still hovering dangerously close to her neck. Stealing is hanging offense in these parts. Terror washed over Lillian like ice water. She knew all too well how quickly a mob mentality could form in frontier towns. Before she could protest further, a deep voice cut through the tension. "I reckon there's been some misunderstanding here." The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward. Lillian had noticed him before. In town it was hard not to. Lucas Blackett stood over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders and strong build marking him as a man who worked with his hands. His sun-bronzed face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but there was no hiding the intensity of his hazel eyes as they assessed the situation. "Mr. Blackett," the shopkeeper acknowledged, his grip on Lillian loosening slightly. Lucas Blackett wasn't just any cowboy, he owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory and employed half the men in town. His word carried weight. "That handkerchief belongs to my sister," Lucas stated calmly, though there was steel beneath his words. "I asked Miss Norwood to pick it up for me while she was in town. Must have slipped my mind to mention it to you, Holloway." Lillian opened her mouth to protest. She had never spoken to Lucas Blackett in her life, let alone agreed to pick up anything for his sister, but something in his expression silenced her. The shopkeeper frowned, clearly skeptical. "Your sister, you say?" "That's right." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins. "I'll pay twice over for any trouble caused. $5 should cover it, I believe." The amount was outrageous for a simple handkerchief, even one made of fine silk. Mr. Holloway's eyes widened at the sight of the money. The knife disappeared from Lillian's throat as he eagerly accepted the payment. "And I'll be taking Miss Norwood home now," Lucas continued, his gaze never leaving Lillian's face. "She's been hired to help at the ranch. My sister's been unwell, needs a woman's touch around the place." Before Lillian could process what was happening, Lucas Blackett had gathered her scattered purchases, taken her gently by the elbow, and was steering her through the whispering crowd. She was too stunned to resist as he led her toward a magnificent chestnut horse tethered nearby. "I don't understand," she finally managed to say when they were out of earshot of the crowd. "Why did you do that? I've never met your sister. I've never met you." Lucas's expression remained unreadable as he secured her purchases to his saddle. "I don't have a sister, Miss Norwood." "Then why?" "I've seen Holloway pull that trick before," he explained quietly. "Plants something valuable on a customer, then accuses them of stealing, usually targets women traveling alone, folks who can't defend themselves properly." His eyes met hers directly. "Was I wrong to intervene?" "No," Lillian admitted, still trying to make sense of the situation. "But I can't go with you. I don't know you, Mr. Blackett." "Do you have somewhere else to go? Someone waiting for you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She had been staying in the back room of Mrs. Peterson's laundry, working for her board, and barely making enough to feed herself. And after today's scene in the marketplace, that arrangement would likely end. Mrs. Peterson valued her reputation too much to harbor a suspected thief. "I thought not," Lucas said softly, noting her silence. "The offer is genuine, Miss Norwood. My housekeeper left last month, and the place has fallen into disarray. It's honest work with fair pay and your own quarters. Why would you offer such a thing to a stranger, one who was just accused of stealing no less?" A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I'm a good judge of character, Miss Norwood, and I don't believe you're a thief." He extended his hand toward her. "Now, shall we go before Holloway decides $5 wasn't enough?" Lillian hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. What choice did she have, really? He helped her mount the horse, then swung up behind her. The solid warmth of his chest against her back was both alarming and oddly comforting as the horse began to move. "I still don't understand why you helped me," she said as they rode out of town, the buildings of Redemption Creek growing smaller behind them. "Sometimes a man just knows when something isn't right," Lucas replied, his voice close to her ear. "And sometimes he has to act on that feeling." Lillian wasn't sure if that answered her question or raised a dozen more, but as the rolling hills and open plains stretched before them, she decided it didn't matter for now. She was alive, unhurt, and for the first time in months, she wasn't alone. What she couldn't have known was how completely that morning in the marketplace would transform her life, or that the man seated behind her, whose heartbeat she could feel through her back, would come to mean more to her than she could possibly imagine. The Blackett Ranch sprawled across the Wyoming landscape like a kingdom unto itself. As they crested the final hill, Lillian's breath caught at the sight before her. A large, two-story ranch house stood proudly at the center, surrounded by numerous outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. Unlike the rough-hewn cabins common in the territory, this house had been built with care and attention to detail painted white with green shutters and a broad wraparound porch. "Welcome to Evergreen," Lucas said, his deep voice rumbling through her as they approached. "Been in my family for 15 years now." "It's beautiful," Lillian admitted truthfully. After months of cramped quarters and uncertain shelter, the sight of such stability was overwhelming. As they rode into the yard, several ranch hands looked up from their work, curiosity evident in their expressions. Lucas dismounted first, then reached up to help Lillian down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist. But he released her quickly once her feet touched the ground. "Miguel," he called to a young man approaching from the barn. "Take care of Duster for me, will you?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Blackett," Miguel replied, taking the reins while casting curious glances at Lillian. Lucas gathered her meager purchases and nodded toward the house. "Let me show you inside. You must be tired after everything that happened in town." Lillian followed him up the porch steps, suddenly aware of how dusty and disheveled she must look. Her blue calico dress had seen better days, and her dark blonde hair had partly escaped its practical bun during the commotion at the market. The interior of the house surprised her. It was well built and spacious, with polished wooden floors and tall windows that let in ample light. But it also showed clear signs of neglect. Dust had gathered on surfaces. Dishes were stacked unwashed by the kitchen sink, and various items lay scattered about in disorganized heaps. "As you can see," Lucas said, setting her purchases on a large oak dining table, "I wasn't exaggerating about needing help. Mrs. Winters left rather abruptly when her daughter in Denver had a baby. Can't blame her for wanting to be with family, but it's nothing that can't be set right," Lillian assured him, professional instincts already assessing what needed to be done. Growing up in her parents' boarding house in Missouri had taught her everything about maintaining a home. Lucas seemed relieved by her reaction. "I'll show you to your room. Then perhaps you'd like to rest before dinner?" The room he led her to was small but pleasant, located off the kitchen. It held a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a simple dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked a kitchen garden that had clearly seen better days. "This was Mrs. Winters' room," Lucas explained. "It's modest, but private. The door has a lock, if that makes you feel more comfortable. The consideration touched Lillian unexpectedly. "Thank you, Mr. Blackett." "Lucas," he corrected her. "If you're going to be living here, we might as well use our given names. May I call you Lillian?" She nodded, feeling strangely vulnerable at the sound of her name on his lips. "Well then, Lillian, I'll leave you to settle in. There's a pump in the kitchen for fresh water if you'd like to wash up. Dinner is usually at 6. When he left, closing the door softly behind him, Lillian sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The events of the day crashed over her, the terror of the knife at her throat, the public accusation, and now this strange turn of fortune that had brought her to this beautiful, neglected house with a man she barely knew. What had she gotten herself into? Lucas Blackett was respected in the territory, certainly, but that didn't mean she was safe. Men with power often felt entitled to more than just household services from women in her position. Yet, something in his manner, the respectful distance he maintained, the door with a lock, the lack of presumption in his speech suggested he might be different from other men she had encountered since leaving home. Lillian rose and went to the small mirror above the washstand. Her reflection showed a young woman with wary blue eyes and a smudge of dirt on one cheek. She had changed since leaving Missouri, grown leaner and harder, her skin more tanned from outdoor work. The fresh-faced girl who had set out with such hopes had been replaced by this cautious woman who measured each word and watched for danger at every turn. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, an old mantra that had carried her through the darkest moments. Just one day at a time. She splashed water on her face and straightened her clothing as best she could. Whatever Lucas Blackett's reasons for bringing her here, she would earn her keep. And if his intentions proved dishonorable, well, she had survived worse. The knife she kept strapped to her thigh beneath her skirts had seen to that. By 6 o'clock, Lillian had washed her face and hands, repinned her hair, and brushed the dust from her dress. She emerged from her room to find Lucas setting the table with mismatched plates and slightly tarnished silverware. "I hope you don't mind simple fare," he said, glancing up as she entered. "I'm afraid my cooking skills are limited to beans, bacon, and coffee." "I'd be happy to cook," Lillian offered, moving toward the kitchen. "It's part of why I'm here, isn't it?" "Not tonight," Lucas insisted. "You've had a trying day. Tomorrow is soon enough to start your duties." The consideration surprised her again. She watched as he moved around the kitchen, with the awkward determination of a man unaccustomed to domestic tasks. Despite his imposing stature, there was something almost endearing about his careful attention to the meal he was preparing. Over dinner, which proved to be exactly as advertised, beans, bacon, and sourdough bread that had clearly come from town, Lucas explained the workings of the ranch. Evergreen employed 8 full-time hands who lived in the bunkhouse, plus additional help during roundup and branding seasons. As housekeeper, Lillian would be responsible for cooking, cleaning, laundry, and maintaining the kitchen garden. "The pay is $20 a month, plus room and board," he said. "Sundays are yours to do with as you please. If that sounds fair." It was more than fair, it was generous. Lillian had never earned more than $12 a month in any of her previous positions. "That's very generous, Mr. Lucas," she corrected herself. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I believe in paying fairly for honest work." As they ate, Lillian found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. Lucas Blackett was not what she would call handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too strong, too weathered for that. But there was something compelling about him, a quiet intensity that drew the eye. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, with streaks of silver just beginning to appear at his temples, lending him an air of distinction. "May I ask you something?" she ventured when there was a lull in the conversation. "Of course. How did you know my name? Back in town, you called me Miss Norwood, but I don't recall ever introducing myself to you." Lucas set down his fork. "This is a small territory, Lillian. People talk. I knew you were staying with Mrs. Peterson, helping with her laundry business. And what else have people said about me?" His gaze met hers directly. "That you arrived 6 months ago on the stagecoach from Missouri. That you keep to yourself and work hard. That you're polite but guarded, and that no one knows exactly what brought you here." Lillian's hand tightened around her fork. "I see. I'm not asking for your story," Lucas added quietly. "Everyone in the West has something they've left behind. Your past is your own business." Relief washed through her. "Thank you for that. After dinner, she insisted on washing the dishes despite his protests. As she worked, Lucas sat at the table with account books and papers, occasionally asking her questions about supplies they might need from town. It was strange how quickly a routine seemed to establish itself between them, as if they had known each other for much longer than mere hours. By the time Lillian retired to her room, exhaustion had finally caught up with her. She secured the lock on her door more out of habit than fear and collapsed onto the bed, sleep claiming her almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of Lucas's hands strong and capable, yet unexpectedly gentle when he had helped her from his horse. The following days established a rhythm to life at Evergreen. Lillian rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Lucas and the ranch hands. The men ate heartily, initially shy around her, but gradually warming to her presence, especially once they tasted her cooking. After breakfast, she turned her attention to the house, tackling one room at a time to bring order to the chaos. Lucas typically left after breakfast to work with the cattle or ride the boundaries of his property, returning for the midday meal if his duties allowed. In the evenings, they would share dinner, their conversations gradually becoming less stilted and more comfortable. By the end of her first week, Lillian had transformed the main living areas of the house. Dust had been banished, floors polished, and windows washed until they sparkled in the sunlight. She had organized the kitchen and pantry, discarding spoiled food and creating an inventory of supplies needed from town. "The place hasn't looked this good since my mother was alive," Lucas commented one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "You grew up here?" Lillian asked, surprised. Somehow she had imagined him acquiring the ranch as an adult. "From the age of 15, he said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "My father was a dreamer who followed one get-rich-quick scheme after another. We moved constantly, California, Nevada, Colorado, always chasing the next opportunity. Then he heard about land in the Wyoming Territory, available for those willing to work it." Lucas paused, taking a sip from the coffee mug in his hands. It was the first time one of his dreams actually took root. "My mother loved it here," said the big sky and open plains made her feel like she could breathe properly for the first time in her life. "She's no longer with us?" Lillian asked gently. "Influenza took her 10 years ago. My father followed 3 years later, thrown from a horse while checking fence lines." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I've been running Evergreen since then." "You've done a remarkable job," Lillian said sincerely. "Building something like this takes dedication." "And sacrifice," he added quietly. They sat in companionable silence as darkness gradually claimed the land. Lillian felt a strange contentment in these evening conversations, something she hadn't expected when she first arrived at Evergreen. "May I ask you something personal?" Lucas's voice broke the quiet. Lillian tensed slightly. "You may ask. I might not answer." He nodded, accepting her terms. "What brought you to Redemption Creek? A young woman traveling alone. It's unusual, even in these times." She considered deflecting the question, but found herself wanting to offer some truth in exchange for the shelter he had provided. "I left Missouri because there was nothing left for me there. My parents died within months of each other, father from heart failure, mother from grief, I think. The boarding house they ran had debts I couldn't pay, so it was sold." "I'm sorry," Lucas said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. "There was a man," Lillian continued, surprising herself with her candor. "The son of the bank president. He offered to help me to clear the debts if I would. Become his wife." Lucas's hands tightened around his mug. "But you refused." "He wasn't offering marriage, not really." Lillian stared into the gathering darkness. "He already had a fiancée from a good family. What he wanted was an arrangement, one that would leave me with no dignity and no future once he tired of me. So you left." "I took what little money remained after the debts were settled and bought a ticket on the first stagecoach heading west." She smiled faintly. "I had read stories about the frontier, how a person could reinvent themselves here, start fresh. And has it been what you hoped? This fresh start?" Lillian considered the question carefully. "It's been harder than I imagined. Women have few opportunities out here unless they marry or—" She left the alternative unspoken. "But there's a freedom too. No one knows who I was or what's expected of me based on my family or position. And now, Working here at Evergreen?" She turned to look at him, his features barely visible in the fading light. "It's the first time since leaving home that I've felt safe." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Lucas nodded slowly, as if understanding everything she wasn't saying. "I'm glad of that," he said simply. Later, lying in her bed, Lillian reflected on their conversation. She had shared more with Lucas Blackett in one evening than she had with anyone since arriving in the territory. There was something about him that invited confidence, a steadiness that made her feel she could speak freely without judgment. But she hadn't told him everything. Some parts of her past were too painful, too raw to share even with someone who had shown her nothing but kindness. The real reason she had fled Missouri so precipitously, the fear that still woke her sometimes in the dead of night. Those secrets remained her own. As spring blossomed into early summer, Lillian found herself settling into life at Evergreen with surprising ease. The kitchen garden had been resurrected under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their meals. She had established a routine for the household chores that left her time to undertake special projects, canning preserves, making soap, and even repairing some of the curtains that had grown threadbare. Lucas seemed to appreciate her efforts, often commenting on the improvements she made around the house. Their evening conversations on the porch had become a highlight of her days, moments of quiet connection after their respective duties were complete. She learned more about him in these conversations, how he had expanded the ranch from the modest operation his father had established to one of the most successful in the territory, how he read voraciously during the winter months when ranch work slowed, ordering books from as far away as Chicago and San Francisco. What she didn't learn, what he never volunteered, was why a man of his position and means remained unmarried. At 34, Lucas was well past the age when most men in the territory took wives. Occasionally, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, but he maintained a careful distance, never crossing the boundaries of propriety. One afternoon in late June, Lillian was hanging laundry in the yard when she noticed a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. As it drew closer, she made out a buggy being driven at a considerable speed. Lucas emerged from the barn, having noticed the arrival as well. He stood beside Lillian as the buggy pulled up to the house. A woman, approximately Lillian's age, stepped down, her fashionable traveling suit and elaborately styled dark hair marking her as someone of means. "Lucas Blackett, you impossible man!" the woman exclaimed, marching toward them with determination. 3 months without a word, and I have to hear from town gossip that you've installed some woman in your home? Lillian felt herself flush with embarrassment as the stranger's gaze swept over her dismissively before returning to Lucas. "Hello, Victoria," Lucas said calmly. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," the woman Victoria replied tartly. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your housekeeper?" The slight pause before the word housekeeper carried unmistakable insinuation. Lillian's embarrassment transformed quickly into indignation. "Victoria Carter, this is Lillian Norwood," Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral. "Lillian, Miss Carter is the daughter of my father's former business partner." "How quaint," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, Miss Norwood, where did Lucas find you? Not in town, surely. I would have remembered someone so rustic." Before Lillian could respond, Lucas intervened. "Victoria, I assume there's a purpose to your visit beyond insulting my employee?" Victoria's expression softened as she turned to him. "Of course there is, darling. Father sent me to personally deliver an invitation to the Independence Day celebration at our ranch. It's going to be the social event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there." She reached into her reticule and extracted an embossed card, which she handed to Lucas with a flourish. "The fireworks display alone is costing Father a small fortune. You simply must attend." Lucas accepted the invitation with a polite nod. "Thank you. I'll consider it." "Consider it?" Victoria frowned. "Lucas, you haven't attended a social function in months. People are beginning to talk." "People always talk," he replied evenly. "Is that all, Victoria? I have work to attend to." Victoria's gaze darted between Lucas and Lillian, a calculation forming behind her eyes. "Actually, I'm parched from the drive. Perhaps Miss Norwood could prepare some refreshment while we catch up." Lucas glanced at Lillian, a silent question in his expression. She nodded slightly. Of course, I'll bring some lemonade to the porch. As she retreated to the house, she heard Victoria's voice drop to a more intimate tone. Really, Lucas, you could have at least warned me you'd hired new help. When Mrs. Findlay told me there was a young woman living at Evergreen, I hardly knew what to think. Inside the kitchen, Lillian's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the lemonade. The implication in Victoria's words and manner was unmistakable. She believed Lillian to be more than just Lucas's housekeeper, and from her proprietary tone, it was clear Victoria considered herself to have some claim on Lucas's affections. When Lillian brought the tray to the porch, Victoria was seated close to Lucas, her hand resting on his arm as she spoke animatedly about people and events Lillian knew nothing about. She fell silent as Lillian approached, watching with narrowed eyes as she set down the refreshments. Thank you, Lillian, Lucas said, his voice warmer than strictly necessary. That will be all for now. Dismissed like a servant, Lillian retreated to the house, her cheeks burning. She busied herself with dinner preparations, trying not to listen to the murmur of voices from the porch, trying even harder not to care what they might be discussing. It was nearly an hour before she heard the buggy depart. When Lucas entered the kitchen, his expression was unreadable. I apologize for Victoria's behavior, he said without preamble. She can be difficult. There's no need to apologize, Lillian replied, keeping her attention on the vegetables she was chopping. Miss Carter obviously cares for you a great deal. Victoria cares for the idea of me, Lucas corrected, leaning against the doorframe. Or rather, the idea of what Evergreen represents. Her father's ranch is mortgaged to the hilt, and they're struggling to maintain appearances. Lillian looked up at him then. You sound very certain of her motives. Victoria has been setting her cap for me since she was 16, he said with a wry smile. Her intentions have never been particularly subtle. And yours? The question slipped out before Lillian could stop herself. Lucas held her gaze steadily. I have no intention of marrying Victoria Carter or anyone else who values property above the person. Something in his tone made Lillian's heart beat a little faster. She turned back to her cooking, unsure how to respond. The Independence Day celebration might be enjoyable, though, Lucas continued after a moment. Would you like to attend? Lillian nearly dropped her knife in surprise. Me? I couldn't possibly. It sounds like a gathering for the prominent families of the territory. And as the housekeeper of Evergreen, you would be included in my household, Lucas pointed out. Besides, you haven't had a day off since you arrived. It might be nice for you to socialize a bit. The thought of facing Victoria and her ilk made Lillian's stomach knot with anxiety. I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an event. We could remedy that, Lucas suggested. I need to go into town next week for supplies. We could visit the dressmaker while we're there. Lillian shook her head firmly. I couldn't accept such a gift. It wouldn't be proper. Consider it an advance on your wages then. When she still hesitated, he added more softly, I would appreciate your company, Lillian. These gatherings can be tedious affairs without someone sensible to talk to. Put that way, how could she refuse? Very well, she conceded, but I insist on paying for any new clothing from my own earnings. Lucas smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. As you wish. The trip to town the following week marked Lillian's first return to Redemption Creek since the incident at the marketplace. She was nervous as they rode in Lucas's wagon, wondering what kind of reception she would face. To her relief, Lucas's presence seemed to shield her from any lingering suspicion. The shopkeepers and townsfolk greeted them with deference, and, if there were whispers as they passed, they were discreet enough that Lillian could ignore them. The dressmaker, Mrs. Fleming, welcomed them warmly. Mr. Blackett, what a pleasure! And Miss Norwood. How lovely to see you again. Miss Norwood needs a dress suitable for the Carter Independence Day celebration, Lucas explained. Something appropriate but not overly extravagant. Mrs. Fleming's eyes lit up at the commission. I have just the thing, a new pattern from Harper's Bazaar that would suit Miss Norwood's figure beautifully. Let me show you some fabrics. While Lucas attended to other business in town, Lillian spent 2 hours being measured and fitted, discussing patterns and trimmings. She chose a fabric in a deep blue that Mrs. Fleming assured her complemented her eyes and fair coloring. The dress will be ready by the end of next week, the dressmaker promised as they finished, And if I may say so, Miss Norwood, you'll be the belle of the celebration in this design." Lillian blushed at the compliment, unused to such attention. When Lucas returned to collect her, he settled the bill despite her protests, insisting that he would deduct it from her wages in installments. As they drove back to Evergreen, Lucas seemed more relaxed than Lillian had ever seen him. "That wasn't so terrible, was it?" he asked with a hint of teasing in his voice. "It was actually quite pleasant," she admitted. "Though I'm not convinced this celebration will be." "Just stay by my side," Lucas said. "I'll make sure you enjoy yourself." The casual promise sent an unexpected warmth through Lillian. She told herself it was simply relief at having his protection in what would surely be an uncomfortable social situation. But deep down, she knew there was more to it, a growing attachment to this serious, thoughtful man that went beyond gratitude for his kindness. It was a dangerous feeling, one she had no right to indulge. Lucas Blackett might be different from other men she had encountered, but the fact remained that he was her employer. Whatever friendship had developed between them existed within strict boundaries she could not afford to forget. Yet, as they rode side by side under the vast Wyoming sky, those boundaries felt increasingly difficult to remember. The morning of the Independence Day celebration arrived with perfect summer weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze that tempered the July heat. Lillian rose early to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, who would be maintaining essential duties while Lucas attended the Carter's event. After the men had been fed, she retreated to her room to prepare herself. The new dress had been delivered as promised, and Lillian handled it with reverent care as she laid it across her bed. The deep blue fabric was finer than anything she had worn since leaving Missouri, and Mrs. Fleming's craftsmanship was evident in every careful stitch. Lillian bathed thoroughly, washing her hair with her precious bar of lavender soap, a small luxury she had purchased with her first wages. After drying her hair in the sun, she styled it more elaborately than usual, creating a sophisticated arrangement of curls and braids that framed her face becomingly. When she finally donned the new dress, she could scarcely recognize the woman who stared back at her from the small mirror. The bodice fitted perfectly, accentuating her slender waist, while the skirt fell in graceful folds to the floor. The neckline was modest, yet feminine, edged with delicate lace that echoed the trim at the cuffs. A soft knock at her door startled her from her self-assessment. "Lillian, are you ready? We should leave soon if we're to arrive at a respectable time." "Just a moment," she called, making a final adjustment to her hair before opening the door. Lucas stood in the hallway, dressed in what was clearly his finest clothing, a well-tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, transforming from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. The effect was striking, but it was his expression when he saw her that made Lillian's breath catch. His eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "You look," he began, then paused as if searching for the right word. "Beautiful, Lillian. Truly beautiful." The sincerity in his voice made her blush deepen. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." A slight smile touched his lips. "High praise indeed. Shall we go?" He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it, acutely aware of the firm muscle beneath the fabric of his jacket. They walked to the waiting buggy, which had been polished until it gleamed in the sunlight. The drive to the Carter Ranch took nearly an hour, during which Lucas briefed Lillian on the various personalities she might encounter at the celebration. The territorial governor might make an appearance. He and Carter have business dealings, and Judge Hollister will certainly be there with his wife and daughters. They're good people, not prone to gossip. "Unlike Mrs. Findlay, I presume," Lillian said wryly. Recalling Victoria's mention of the woman who had informed her about Lillian's presence at Evergreen, Lucas grimaced. "Mrs. Findlay considers it her Christian duty to monitor everyone's business. Best to avoid her if possible." As they approached the Carter property, it became clear that Victoria's description of the event as the social event of the season had not been exaggerated. Dozens of buggies and wagons lined the approach to the main house, which had been festooned with patriotic bunting. Tables had been set up on the sprawling lawn, laden with food and drink, while a small group of musicians played on a makeshift stage. "It appears the entire territory has been invited," Lillian murmured, suddenly anxious about the prospect of facing so many strangers. Lucas's hand covered hers briefly where it rested on his arm. "Remember, you're here as my guest. You have every right to enjoy the celebration." His reassurance steadied her as they joined the throng of well-dressed attendees. Lucas was greeted with respect and deference by most, though Lillian noted the curious glances directed her way. She maintained a polite smile, determined not to show her discomfort. They had barely completed a circuit of the grounds when Victoria descended upon them, resplendent in a gown of crimson silk that displayed her figure to dramatic advantage. "Lucas, you came!" she exclaimed, ignoring Lillian completely as she placed both hands on his arm. "Father will be so pleased. He's been hoping to discuss the possibility of combining our herds for the fall drive to the railhead." "A business discussion for another day, perhaps," Lucas replied smoothly, subtly extracting himself from her grip. "Victoria, you remember Miss Norwood?" Victoria's gaze flicked dismissively over Lillian. "Of course. How unexpected to see you here, Miss Norwood. I had assumed you would be attending to the ranch while Lucas joined us." Before Lillian could respond, Lucas spoke. "Miss Norwood works extraordinarily hard. She deserves a day of enjoyment as much as anyone." Victoria's smile tightened fractionally. "How considerate of you, Lucas. Well, you must both help yourselves to refreshments. The champagne has been chilling since dawn. Father imported it specially from San Francisco." As she swept away to greet other guests, Lillian released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I think my presence genuinely disturbs her." "Victoria is used to being the center of attention," Lucas said, guiding Lillian toward the refreshment tables. "Especially mine." "And has she been? The center of your attention, I mean." Lucas considered the question as he handed Lillian a glass of lemonade. "There was a time when my father hoped I might marry Victoria. The Carters were influential, and such a match would have secured Evergreen's position in the territory. But you didn't want that." "I wanted to marry for love, not advantage," he said simply. "My mother and father had that kind of marriage, despite all their struggles. I saw what it meant to them, how it sustained them through hardship. I couldn't settle for less." His words resonated deeply with Lillian, who had refused to accept the loveless arrangement offered to her in Missouri. "That's a rare perspective for a man in your position." "Perhaps, but I've never been one to follow convention merely for its own sake." As the afternoon progressed, Lillian found herself gradually relaxing. Lucas introduced her to several people he considered friends, including Judge Hollister and his wife, who treated her with genuine warmth. She even enjoyed a lively conversation with the territorial governor's wife about recent developments in women's education. The meal served by the Carters was elaborate and delicious roast beef, ham, chicken, and all manner of side dishes and desserts. Lillian ate sparingly, conscious of her manners and the many eyes that seemed to be watching her interaction with Lucas. After the meal, the musicians struck up more lively tunes, and couples began to dance on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion. Lucas turned to Lillian with an inquiring expression. "Would you care to dance?" The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. "I haven't danced in years," she admitted. "I'm sure to embarrass both of us." "Nonsense," he replied, rising and extending his hand. "It's like riding a horse the body remembers." Before she could protest further, Lillian found herself being led to the dance floor. Lucas's hand at her waist was firm but respectful, maintaining a proper distance between them as they joined the other couples in a waltz. To her surprise, the steps did come back to her lessons from her youth in Missouri, returning as Lucas guided her confidently around the floor. He was an excellent dancer, his movements fluid and assured, despite his imposing size. "See, you're a natural," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear over the music. Lillian smiled up at him, momentarily forgetting the watching crowd, lost in the simple pleasure of moving in harmony with this man who had become so important to her life. "You're a patient teacher." As the music continued, Lillian became aware of whispers and glances directed their way. Victoria stood at the edge of the dance floor, her expression thunderous as she watched them. "Everyone is staring," Lillian whispered, her smile faltering. "Let them," Lucas replied, his gaze never leaving her face. "I'm dancing with the most beautiful woman at the celebration. Why wouldn't they stare?" The compliment warmed her despite her anxiety. As the dance ended, Lucas led her away from the floor, his hand at the small of her back, a protective presence. "Would you like to walk a bit?" he suggested. "The Carters have quite extensive gardens, and it might be pleasant to escape the crowd for a moment." Lillian nodded gratefully, and they made their way toward a path that led away from the main gathering. The gardens were indeed impressive, carefully tended beds of flowers interspersed with decorative shrubs and small trees. As they walked, the sounds of the celebration faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and distant bird song. "Thank you for bringing me today," Lillian said, as they paused beside a small ornamental pond. "Despite my reservations, I've enjoyed myself." "I'm glad," Lucas replied. "It's good to see you smiling, Lillian. You do it too rarely." She looked up at him, struck by the gentleness in his expression. "I smile more at Evergreen than I have anywhere since leaving home." Something shifted in his gaze, then an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Lillian, there's something I've wanted to tell you." "There you are, Lucas!" Victoria's voice shattered the moment as she appeared on the path behind them. "Father has been looking everywhere for you. The fireworks are about to begin, and he wants you at his side for the display." Lucas's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Please tell your father. I'll join him shortly." "Oh, but he's waiting now," Victoria insisted, moving closer and placing a possessive hand on his arm. "You know how important this display is to him. He's been planning it for months." For a moment, Lucas seemed ready to refuse, but propriety won out. "Very well," he conceded before turning to Lillian. "Will you be all right for a few minutes? I won't be long." "Of course," Lillian assured him. "Don't worry about me." As Lucas allowed himself to be led away, Victoria threw a triumphant glance over her shoulder. The message was clear. Lillian might have captured Lucas's attention temporarily, but Victoria considered herself the rightful claimant to his affections. Left alone in the garden, Lillian tried to recapture the contentment she had felt earlier in the day. But doubt had crept in, as insidious as the evening shadows lengthening across the grounds. What had Lucas been about to tell her? And did it matter when their positions in life were so different? She was still lost in these thoughts when she became aware of footsteps approaching, not from the direction Lucas and Victoria had gone, but from a side path partially concealed by shrubbery. Well, well, if it isn't the thief from the marketplace. Mr. Holloway, the shopkeeper who had accused her of stealing months ago, emerged from the shadows, a glass of what appeared to be whiskey clutched in his meaty hand. Quite a transformation from the ragged girl I caught red-handed. Lillian stiffened, instinctively taking a step back. "Mr. Holloway, I didn't expect to see you here." "I do business with Carter," he replied, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "But the real question is, what are you doing here? Last I heard, Blackett had taken you home to help his sister." He chuckled unpleasantly. Seems the rumors about there being no sister were accurate. "Mr. Blackett hired me as his housekeeper," Lillian stated firmly. "There's nothing improper about our arrangement." Holloway's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Is that what they're calling it these days? A pretty young woman living alone with a wealthy bachelor?" "You should be careful about spreading such insinuations," Lillian warned, her voice stronger than she felt. "Mr. Blackett is a respected man in this territory." "Indeed he is," Holloway agreed, taking another step toward her. "Which makes it all the more interesting that he's consorting with a known thief." "I never stole anything from your store," Lillian retorted, anger overcoming her fear. "You planted that handkerchief, just as Mr. Blackett said." Holloway's face darkened. "That's a serious accusation, girl. One that could damage my reputation if it were to spread." "Perhaps it should spread," Lillian suggested boldly. "How many other innocent people have you falsely accused to extort money from them?" His hand shot out suddenly, gripping her wrist with painful force. "Listen carefully, you little—" "I suggest you release Miss Norwood immediately." Lucas's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood at the entrance to the garden path, his expression thunderous as he advanced toward them. Holloway dropped Lillian's wrist as if it had burned him. "Blackett, just having a friendly conversation with your housekeeper." "It didn't look friendly from where I stood," Lucas replied coldly. "And I believe I heard Miss Norwood make some interesting allegations about your business practices." The shopkeeper's face paled slightly. "The girl's confused." Still bitter about being caught stealing, I imagine. We both know she stole nothing, Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet as he positioned himself between Lillian and Holloway. Just as we both know, it's not the first time you've played that particular trick. How many travelers have you extorted money from, Holloway? How many women have you threatened with false accusations? Holloway's bluster faltered under Lucas's steady gaze. You can't prove anything. Perhaps not, but I'm friendly with Judge Hollister, as you may have noticed earlier today. And the territorial governor seems quite interested in tales of corruption in the region. I wonder what might happen if I shared my suspicions with them. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Holloway's gaze darted between Lucas and Lillian, calculation evident in his expression. Fine, he muttered at last. I'll leave the girl alone, but watch yourself, Blackett. People are already talking about you bringing her to live at Evergreen. This little display won't help those rumors. I've never much cared what people say behind my back, Lucas replied evenly. Now, I believe the fireworks are about to begin. You wouldn't want to miss them. With a final glare at Lillian, Holloway retreated down the path toward the main gathering. Once he was out of sight, Lucas turned to Lillian, concern evident in his expression. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? Lillian rubbed her wrist where Holloway's grip had left red marks. Nothing serious. How did you know to come back? I didn't like leaving you alone, Lucas admitted. I made my excuses to Carter as quickly as possible. Victoria must have been disappointed, Lillian observed, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Victoria's feelings are not my primary concern at the moment, Lucas said firmly. He reached out tentatively, taking her hand to examine the marks on her wrist. His touch was gentle, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I'm sorry you had to face him again. It's not your fault, Lillian assured him, though she made no move to reclaim her hand. Holloway is simply the kind of man who preys on those he perceives as vulnerable. And I left you vulnerable, Lucas said, self-recrimination evident in his tone. I shouldn't have allowed Victoria to separate us. You couldn't have known he would be here, Lillian reasoned. Besides, I'm not entirely helpless. I was handling the situation. A hint of a smile touched Lucas's lips. Yes, you were. Quite effectively, from what I heard. Not many would stand up to a man like Holloway as you did. His admiration warmed her more than she cared to admit. Before she could respond, the first firework exploded overhead, illuminating the garden in a brief flash of red light. We should join the others, Lillian suggested reluctantly. People will talk if we're absent for the display. Let them talk, Lucas replied, echoing his words from earlier, but he released her hand and offered his arm instead. But you're right. We shouldn't give Holloway more ammunition for his insinuations. They walked back to the main gathering, where the guests had assembled on the lawn to watch the fireworks. Lucas guided Lillian to a spot somewhat removed from the densest part of the crowd, but still respectably within view of others. As the night sky erupted in spectacular bursts of color and light, Lillian found herself less focused on the display than on the man standing beside her. The way the fireworks illuminated his strong profile in intermittent flashes, the solid warmth of him so close to her side, the lingering sensation of his touch on her wrist. What had he been about to tell her in the garden before Victoria interrupted? And why did it suddenly seem so vitally important? The journey back to Evergreen was quieter than their trip to the celebration had been. Both Lillian and Lucas seemed lost in their own thoughts, the events of the day settling between them, like leaves falling in autumn, gently but inexorably changing the landscape. As the house came into view, Lillian felt a curious mixture of relief and regret. Relief to be returning to the safety and familiarity of Evergreen, away from judgmental eyes and malicious whispers. Regret that the day was ending, taking with it the magical quality of being something other than servant and master, if only for a few hours. Lucas helped her down from the buggy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. In the silvery moonlight, his expression was difficult to read, but something in the way he looked at her made Lillian's breath catch. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "Despite Mr. Holloway's unpleasantness, I enjoyed myself." "As did I," Lucas replied. He hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Lillian, what Holloway suggested about us, I want you to know that I would never presume." "I know," she assured him quickly. "You've been nothing but respectful and kind. You don't need to explain yourself to me. He shook his head slightly. That's not what I meant to say. He took a deep breath, seeming to gather his courage. In the garden, before Victoria interrupted, I was trying to tell you something important. Lillian's heart began to race. Yes? These past months, having you here at Evergreen, it's changed things, changed me. His gaze held hers steadily. I find myself thinking about you at odd moments throughout the day, wondering what you're doing, if you're happy, what you might be thinking. Lucas, she breathed, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. I know it's inappropriate, he continued quickly. You work for me. There's a clear imbalance there that I have no right to disregard, but I can't pretend that my feelings for you are simply those of an employer for a valued employee. Lillian felt as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. What are you saying exactly? In the silver moonlight, Lucas's expression was one of raw honesty. I'm saying that I care for you, Lillian, more than I should, more than is proper given our circumstances. The confession hung between them, fragile and momentous. Lillian knew that her response would forever alter the course of their relationship, and perhaps the course of her life. I care for you too, she admitted softly. I've tried not to. I've reminded myself daily of the differences in our positions, of all the reasons why such feelings are foolish and dangerous. And yet, Lucas prompted, hope kindling in his eyes. And yet, they persist, Lillian finished, a small smile touching her lips. Despite all my best efforts. Lucas took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. What do we do with these feelings, Lillian? I won't ask you to compromise yourself. I respect you too much for that. I don't know, she answered honestly. This is uncharted territory for me. For me as well, Lucas admitted. But perhaps we could navigate it together, slowly and with care. His hand reached for hers, tentative in a way that touched her deeply. This powerful man, so confident in all other aspects of his life, was approaching her with such gentle uncertainty. Lillian laced her fingers with his, the simple contact sending warmth spreading through her. I would like that, she whispered. They stood there in the moonlight, hands joined, the vast Wyoming sky stretching endlessly above them. It was a beginning fragile and uncertain, but filled with possibility. We should go inside, Lucas said at last, though he made no move to release her hand. It's been a long day. Reluctantly, Lillian nodded. As they walked toward the house, still hand in hand, she felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for longer than she could remember. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles society might place in their path, in this moment, she allowed herself to simply feel the joy of connection with this remarkable man. At the door to her room, Lucas finally released her hand, though his gaze lingered on her face. Good night, Lillian. Good night, Lucas, she replied softly. Long after he had gone, Lillian stood in her room, her fingers tracing the spot where his hand had held hers. The Independence Day celebration had indeed marked a new beginning, not just for the nation, but for her heart as well. In the weeks that followed their conversation in the moonlight, Lillian and Lucas began a careful dance of discovery. Outwardly, little changed in their daily routines. She maintained the house and prepared meals, while he tended to the ranch and his business affairs. But beneath this ordinary surface, a current of awareness flowed between them, electrifying even the most mundane interactions. Their evening conversations on the porch became precious opportunities to learn more about each other. Lucas spoke of his childhood dreams, his struggles to keep the ranch after his parents' deaths, his hopes for the future. Lillian shared stories of her life in Missouri, her love of books, her desire to someday see the ocean. Occasionally his hand would find hers in the gathering darkness, or she would rest her head against his shoulder as they watched the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. These simple touches, innocent by any standard, nonetheless carried profound meaning for them both. The ranch hands noticed the change, of course. Lillian caught their knowing glances and suppressed smiles when Lucas lingered over breakfast or found reasons to return to the house during the day. But to their credit, the men showed only respect, treating Lillian with increased deference as they recognized her growing importance to their employer. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, Lucas broached a subject they had both been carefully avoiding. "People in town are talking," he said quietly. "About us." Lillian tensed slightly. "What are they saying?" "Nothing specific, just whispers, glances." He turned to look at her directly. "It bothers me that your reputation might suffer because of me." "My reputation was hardly pristine to begin with," she reminded him wryly. "The woman accused of stealing, taken in by the bachelor rancher. I'm sure speculation began the moment we rode out of town together." "That doesn't make it right," Lucas said firmly. "You deserve better than to be the subject of gossip." Lillian considered his words carefully before responding. "What would you have us do, Lucas? End whatever this is between us? Return to being simply employer and employee?" The very thought sent a pang of loss through her, so acute it was almost physical. These past weeks of growing closeness had brought her more happiness than she had believed possible after all she had endured. "No," Lucas replied immediately, his hand finding hers. "That's not what I want at all." "What do you want?" Lillian asked softly, her heart hammering in her chest. Lucas took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for something momentous. "I want to court you properly, Lillian, openly and honorably, with the respect you deserve." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected given the direction of their relationship, nonetheless left Lillian breathless. "Lucas, You don't need to answer now," he hurried to add. "I understand this is sudden, and our situation is complicated. I just wanted you to know my intentions." Lillian squeezed his hand gently. "It's not that I don't want to be courted by you. It's just, are you certain? There are women like Victoria Carter who would bring connections and advantages to a match with you. I have nothing to offer but myself. And that is everything I want," Lucas said with such simple sincerity that tears sprang to Lillian's eyes. "Victoria, for all her family's influence, has never seen me only what I represent. You see me, Lillian. The man, not the ranch or the cattle or the position in society." He shifted to face her more directly, taking both her hands in his. "From the moment I saw you in that marketplace, something in me recognized something in you. I can't explain it more clearly than that. I just knew I needed to help you, to know you." Lillian's throat tightened with emotion. "I felt it too," she admitted. "Even then, frightened as I was, there was something about you that made me trust you when I had sworn never to trust a man again." Lucas's expression grew serious. "Lillian, there's something I need to ask you, something that's been troubling me." She tensed slightly, hearing the change in his tone. "What is it?" "That day in the marketplace, you said Holloway planted that handkerchief on you. I believed you then, and I believe you now. But I've wondered, why would he target you specifically? Was it truly random, or was there some reason?" The question struck at the heart of the secret Lillian had been keeping. Her hands trembled slightly in his grasp. "You don't have to tell me," Lucas added quickly. "I have no right to demand your past, but if there's something or someone you're afraid of, I want to help." Lillian took a shaky breath. If she was going to allow Lucas to court her to potentially build a future with him, didn't he deserve to know everything? "It wasn't random," she admitted finally. "Holloway knew exactly who I was when he accused me." Lucas waited patiently as she gathered her courage to continue. "When I left Missouri, it wasn't just because of the bank president's son and his improper proposition," Lillian began, her voice low. "There was another man, Richard Thornton. He was wealthy, influential, and utterly ruthless. He wanted to marry me, not out of affection, but because my father had once humiliated him in business, and he saw possessing me as the ultimate revenge." Lucas's hands tightened around hers, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "When I refused him, he became dangerous, threatened me, said no one refused Richard Thornton, and simply walked away." The memories made her voice shake. "The night after my mother's funeral, he came to the boarding house. He was drunk, violent. He said if I wouldn't be his wife, he would take what he wanted anyway." Lucas's expression darkened with anger, but his touch remained gentle. "What happened?" "I had my father's revolver," Lillian said, the words coming more quickly now, as if the floodgates had opened. "I fired a warning shot, and he fled. But I knew he wouldn't give up. That's why I left the very next morning, taking only what I could carry. And you think Holloway knows this man? Is connected to him somehow? Lillian nodded. The night of the Independence Day celebration, after you confronted him, Holloway said something as he was leaving. Something only Thornton would know to tell him. I believe Thornton has been tracking me, using his business connections to search for me across the territories. Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes. That's why you were so frightened that day in the marketplace. Not just because of the accusation, but because you feared it would somehow lead this man to you. Yes, Lillian whispered. I've been running for so long, Lucas, always looking over my shoulder, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Until Evergreen. Until you. Lucas released her hands only to gently cup her face. Listen to me, Lillian. If this man is still searching for you, if he ever finds you, he will have to go through me first. I will not let anyone harm you. The fierce protectiveness in his voice brought fresh tears to Lillian's eyes. I can't ask you to take on my battles. You're not asking. I'm offering. His thumb gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. That's what it means to care for someone, Lillian. Their battles become yours, just as their joys do. In that moment, looking into Lucas's steadfast gaze, Lillian felt the last of her resistance crumble. This man, this good, honorable man, was offering her not just protection, but partnership. The chance to face life's challenges not alone, but together. Yes, she said softly. Lucas looked momentarily confused. Yes? A smile broke through her tears. Yes, Lucas Blackett. You may court me, properly and honorably as you said. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then blazingly bright. Without warning, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper of contact. When he pulled back, his expression was a mixture of elation and uncertainty. I'm sorry. I should have asked first. Lillian's heart felt too full for her chest to contain. Don't apologize, she murmured. Not for that. Under the vast Wyoming sky, with the last rays of sunset gilding the world in gold, Lucas kissed her again more confidently this time, but still with exquisite tenderness. Lillian's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss, pouring into it all the feelings she had been holding back for so long. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. Whatever comes, Lillian, we'll face it together. I promise you that. In his arms, with the solid presence of Evergreen at their backs, Lillian allowed herself to believe in that promise, and in the future it represented. True to his word, Lucas began courting Lillian openly, and with all the propriety the circumstances allowed. On Sundays, her designated day off, he would take her on outings, picnics by the creek that ran through Evergreen property, rides to scenic overlooks in the hills, or visits to town, where he proudly escorted her through the streets, his intentions clear to all who observed them. The reactions in Redemption Creek were mixed, as expected. Some, like Judge Hollister and his wife, offered genuine congratulations. Others watched with barely concealed disapproval or speculation. Victoria Carter, upon encountering them at the general store one Sunday, had turned so pale with fury that Lillian had momentarily feared for her health. Don't mind Victoria, Lucas had said as they rode home afterward. She's been planning to be the mistress of Evergreen since we were children. It will take time for her to accept that it will never happen. I'm afraid I've made an enemy there, Lillian observed. Lucas had smiled ruefully. Victoria's bite is rarely as bad as her bark. She'll find another wealthy bachelor to set her cap for soon enough. Despite the gossip and occasional awkwardness, those Sunday outings became the highlights of Lillian's week. In Lucas's company, she rediscovered parts of herself that had been suppressed during her months of fear and flight, her sense of humor, her curiosity about the world, her capacity for joy. Their growing closeness did not alter their daily routines significantly. Lillian continued to manage the household, though Lucas insisted on hiring a young girl from town, Mary, to help with the heavier tasks. You're not my housekeeper anymore, he explained when Lillian protested. You're the woman I'm courting. There's a difference. By early August, as the heat of summer reached its peak, Lillian had begun to believe that perhaps her past would remain just that past. There had been no further incidents with Holloway, and no sign that Richard Thornton had tracked her to Wyoming Territory. Then came the letter. Lucas had ridden into town for supplies and to check on a shipment of breeding stock he was expecting from Colorado. He returned earlier than anticipated, his expression grave as he found Lillian in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for the evening meal. "This came for you," he said without preamble, holding out an envelope. "The postmaster said it arrived yesterday." Lillian wiped her hands on her apron before accepting the envelope. There was no return address, but the handwriting that had formed her name sent ice through her veins. She knew that precise, angular script all too well. "It's from him," she whispered, her fingers trembling so badly she nearly dropped the letter. "From Thornton." Lucas's jaw tightened. "You don't have to open it. We could burn it right now." The temptation to do exactly that was powerful, to consign Richard Thornton's words to the flames without giving them the power to touch her. But something in Lillian, perhaps the same courage that had allowed her to survive this long, knew she needed to face whatever he had written. "I have to know what he says," she decided, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have to know if he's coming." With Lucas standing supportively at her side, Lillian broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of expensive stationery inside. "My dearest Lillian, did you truly believe you could hide from me forever? That I would simply forget the humiliation you caused me? I have followed your trail across 3 territories, and now I have found you at last. I will be arriving in Redemption Creek within the week. I suggest you prepare yourself for our reunion. The outcome will be the same as it was always meant to be, you as my wife, returning to Missouri where you belong. The only question is how difficult you choose to make the process. Your would-be protector, Mr. Blackett, need not suffer any unpleasantness if you cooperate. Consider carefully which matters more to you, your continued defiance or his well-being. Until we meet again, Richard Thornton." Lillian's hands shook so violently that Lucas gently took the letter from her, reading it himself with growing anger evident in his expression. "Threatening me to get to you," he said tightly when he finished. "The man's a coward as well as a villain." "Lucas, you don't understand," Lillian said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard Thornton is not just wealthy, he's dangerous. He's ruined men more powerful than you, for far less than standing between him and what he wants. And what he wants is you." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Lillian wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. "I should leave, tonight. If I'm gone when he arrives?" "No." Lucas's response was immediate and firm. "Running is exactly what he expects you to do. It's what you've done before, and it's only prolonged this situation." "What alternative is there?" Lillian demanded, tears of frustration and fear gathering in her eyes. "I won't be responsible for bringing his vengeance down on you, or Evergreen." Lucas crossed to her in 2 long strides, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "We stand and fight, Lillian. Together, as we promised." "How?" "He has money, influence, probably hired guns." "And we have the law on our side," Lucas interrupted. "This letter is evidence of his threats. Judge Hollister is a friend, and he despises men who use their power to intimidate others. The territorial governor owes me a favor after I helped with that land dispute last year." Lillian shook her head, unconvinced. "Thornton has bribed judges before. Influence can be countered with more influence." "Perhaps. But I'm willing to bet he's never faced a community united against him." Lucas's eyes gleamed with determination. "Redemption Creek may be small, but it protects its own. And like it or not, you're one of us now." "Because of you," Lillian pointed out. "Without your standing, I'm just the woman accused of stealing who works in your house. You're much more than that, and you know it." Lucas's voice softened. "The people who matter know your character, Lillian. They've seen your kindness, your hard work, your integrity. They'll stand with us." Lillian wanted desperately to believe him, to believe that there was a way to end Richard Thornton's pursuit once and for all, rather than simply delaying the inevitable confrontation by running again. "What would we do?" she asked, allowing herself to consider the possibility. "First, we take this letter to Judge Hollister," Lucas said decisively. "Get the law involved immediately. Then we gather our allies' people in town who will stand with us when Thornton arrives. And if he comes with hired guns, with men willing to do violence..." Lucas's expression hardened. Then he'll find that the men of Evergreen know how to protect what's ours. The possessive pronoun sent a shiver through Lillian, not of fear, but of something warmer and more complex. In the weeks of their courtship, Lucas had never pressured her for any declaration or commitment beyond the present. Yet in this moment of crisis, his words made clear that he considered her part of his life, his home, his future. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice small. "Not just for myself, but for you, for everyone who might be hurt because of me." Lucas gathered her into his arms, holding her against the solid warmth of his chest. "Fear is natural, Lillian. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." She allowed herself a moment to draw strength from his embrace before straightening her shoulders and stepping back. "Very well. We'll do it your way. We'll stand and fight." The relief and pride in Lucas's smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "That's my brave girl." The endearment, casual though it was, warmed Lillian to her core. Whatever happened with Richard Thornton, whatever trials lay ahead, she was no longer alone, and that made all the difference. The next several days passed in a flurry of preparation. True to his word, Lucas took Lillian to see Judge Hollister immediately, presenting Thornton's letter as evidence of his threatening intentions. The judge, a stern man with a deep commitment to justice, had read the letter with growing indignation. "Blackmail and threats," he had pronounced, looking up at them over his spectacles. "Coercion, at the very least. I'll issue an order barring this Thornton from approaching you, Miss Norwood, and I'll alert the sheriff to be on the lookout for his arrival." "Will that be enough to stop him?" Lillian had asked skeptically. Judge Hollister's expression had softened slightly. "Legal documents alone rarely deter men like this, I'm afraid, but they establish a framework of law that will make his actions clearly criminal should he choose to violate the order." "And if he does violate it," Lucas had pressed, "then he can be arrested and held for trial," the judge had explained. "But I suggest you take additional precautions in the meantime. Keep Miss Norwood surrounded by friends and allies. Make it clear to this man that she is not isolated or vulnerable." Following the judge's advice, Lucas had gathered the ranch hands that evening, explaining the situation and asking for their support. Lillian had been deeply moved by their immediate and unanimous agreement to stand with her. "Miss Lillian's good people," Miguel had declared, speaking for all of them. "Anyone who tries to harm her will have to go through every man at Evergreen first." Lucas had also spoken with trusted friends in town, the blacksmith, the livery stable owner, several ranchers with adjacent properties. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small communities, and Lillian was touched by how many people offered their support. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had initially been wary after the marketplace incident, had sought Lillian out when they visited town to assure her, "That man won't find any help in Redemption Creek, my dear. We take care of our own here." Despite these reassurances, Lillian grew increasingly tense as the days passed with no sign of Richard Thornton. Lucas insisted she never be alone, accompanying her himself, or ensuring that Miguel or another trusted ranch hand was nearby when his duties called him away. "He's coming," Lillian said with certainty on the 5th evening after receiving the letter. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset as had become their custom, though the peaceful ritual was now tinged with vigilance. "I can feel it." Lucas's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Let him come. We're ready." She leaned into his solid presence, drawing strength from his certainty. "I keep thinking about what happens after. If we succeed in driving him away, making him understand that I'll never return with him." "When we succeed," Lucas corrected gently. "Not if." Lillian smiled faintly at his confidence. "When then?" "What happens afterward? Do we simply return to how things were? You courting me working in your home?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sun was slipping behind the distant mountains. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know," Lillian admitted honestly. "Everything has happened so quickly. 6 months ago, I was alone and afraid, working for Mrs. Peterson and barely surviving. Now I'm here, with you, facing a threat I've been running from for over a year." "And when the threat is gone?" Lucas prompted. "What do you want then, Lillian?" She turned to look at him directly. studying the strong lines of his face in the fading light. "I want peace," she said finally. "The chance to build something lasting without looking over my shoulder. The opportunity to belong somewhere, to someone, completely and without reservation." Lucas's expression softened with tenderness. "You already belong here, Lillian, to Evergreen, to me, if you'll have me." The simple declaration made her heart swell. "Are you asking me something, Lucas Blackett?" A smile touched his lips. "Not yet, not with this shadow hanging over us. When Thornton is gone, truly gone, then I'll ask you properly." With no distractions and no fear clouding the moment, Lillian understood his reasoning, even as part of her longed for the certainty such a commitment would bring. "Then we have even more reason to face this challenge head-on." "Indeed we do," Lucas agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. They were still sitting together as twilight deepened into night, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the silence. Lucas tensed, immediately alert, his hand moving to the revolver he had taken to wearing at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, rising to his feet. Inside the house, with the door locked. "Lucas, please." "Lillian." His expression brooked no argument. "Let me see who it is first." Reluctantly she complied, retreating into the house, but positioning herself near the window, where she could observe without being easily seen. The approaching rider was alone, she noted with some relief. Not Thornton with a gang of hired guns, at least. As the rider came into the yard, the moonlight revealed him to be Miguel, riding hard from the direction of town. Lucas stepped off the porch to meet him, and though Lillian couldn't hear their conversation, the urgent gestures and Lucas's stiffening posture told her the news wasn't good. After a brief exchange, Miguel rode toward the bunkhouse while Lucas returned to the house. His expression as he entered confirmed her fears. "Thornton?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Lucas nodded grimly. "He arrived in town this afternoon, checked into the hotel with 3 men, tough-looking characters, according to Miguel. They've been asking questions about you and about Evergreen." Lillian's heart raced with fear and a strange sense of relief that the waiting was finally over. "What do we do now?" "We move up our timetable," Lucas said decisively. "I was hoping to gather more support before confronting him, but if he's already in town, we need to act quickly before he comes here." "You want to go to him?" Lillian asked incredulously. "Deliberately seek him out? On our terms, in a public place, with Judge Hollister's order in hand and the sheriff present," Lucas clarified. "Better than waiting for him to come to Evergreen in the middle of the night." The logic was sound, but fear still clutched at Lillian's heart. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll send Miguel to alert the sheriff and our friends in town. We'll face Thornton at the hotel, where there will be plenty of witnesses. And if he refuses to accept the judge's order? If he still insists I return with him?" Lucas's expression hardened. "Then he'll discover exactly how seriously Wyoming Territory takes the rule of law and how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his tone should have alarmed Lillian. Instead, it steadied her, reminding her that she was no longer the frightened young woman who had fled Missouri alone. She had allies now. She had Lucas. "I'm going with you," she stated firmly. Lucas began to protest, but Lillian raised a hand to stop him. "This is my battle, Lucas. You've helped me prepare to fight it, but I need to face him myself. I need him to see that I'm not running anymore." For a long moment, Lucas studied her face, as if measuring her resolve. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, but you stay by my side every moment, and you follow my lead if things turn dangerous." "I promise," Lillian agreed, relief washing through her that he understood her need to confront Thornton directly. Lucas reached out to caress her cheek gently. "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow will test us both." Sleep proved elusive that night, despite Lillian's best efforts. She lay awake for hours, her mind cycling through all the possible outcomes of the coming confrontation. Would Thornton back down when faced with legal opposition and community support? Or would his obsession drive him to more desperate measures? By dawn, Lillian had abandoned any pretense of rest. She rose and dressed with particular care, selecting her best dress, the blue one she had worn to the Independence Day celebration. If she was going to face Richard Thornton, she wanted to do so looking confident and composed, not like the frightened girl who had fled Missouri. Lucas was already awake when she emerged from her room, his expression grim but determined as he checked his revolver before securing it in his holster. "The men are ready," he informed her. "Miguel and 4 others will ride with us. The rest will stay here to protect Evergreen, just in case Thornton tries to cause trouble while we're in town." Lillian nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. "I'm ready." Lucas studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. "You look beautiful, Lillian, and stronger than I've ever seen you." "I feel strong," she admitted. "Afraid, yes, but strong too. Because I'm not facing him alone this time." "Never alone again," Lucas promised, offering her his hand. "Not as long as I'm breathing." The ride to town was tense but uneventful. Miguel and the other ranch hands surrounded them protectively, all armed and alert for any sign of trouble. As they approached Redemption Creek, Lillian was surprised to see several familiar faces waiting at the edge of town: the blacksmith, the livery stable owner, even Mrs. Peterson and her son. "Word travels fast," Lucas remarked with grim satisfaction. "It seems our friends have turned out in force." Indeed, as they rode down the main street toward the hotel, Lillian noted many townspeople emerging from shops and homes, their expressions supportive or simply curious. By the time they reached the hotel, quite a crowd had gathered, with Sheriff Davis standing prominently on the boardwalk. "Blackett," the sheriff greeted them as Lucas helped Lillian down from her horse. "Got your message. Judge Hollister's inside, waiting in the hotel dining room. Figured a public confrontation would be safest for all concerned." "Is Thornton there?" Lucas asked, his hand remaining protectively at Lillian's waist. "Him and his 3 hired guns," the sheriff confirmed. "They don't look too happy about being invited to meet with the judge, but they didn't have much choice with me and my deputies encouraging them." Lillian took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Let's get this over with." Lucas squeezed her hand encouragingly before offering his arm. Together, they entered the hotel, followed by Miguel and the sheriff. The hotel dining room, normally quiet at this hour, was buzzing with tension. Judge Hollister sat at one table, legal documents spread before him. Across the room, at another table, sat 4 men. Richard Thornton was instantly recognizable to Lillian, though he had aged since she had last seen him. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and lines of bitterness had etched themselves around his mouth. But his eyes, cold, calculating, possessive, were unchanged as they fixed on her the moment she entered. The 3 men with him were exactly what Lillian had feared: hard-faced strangers, with the unmistakable look of hired guns. They watched with calculating eyes as Lucas guided Lillian toward Judge Hollister's table. "Miss Norwood, Mr. Blackett," the judge greeted them formally. "Please, be seated." As they took their places, Thornton rose from his table, ignoring the judge entirely as he addressed Lillian directly. "Lillian," he said, his voice the same smooth, cultured tone she remembered from her nightmares. "You've led me on quite a chase, my dear. But it ends today. You're coming home with me, where you belong." Before Lillian could respond, Judge Hollister interjected firmly. "Mr. Thornton, you would do well to remain seated and listen carefully to what I have to say." Thornton's gaze flickered dismissively to the judge. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is a private matter between myself and my fiancée." "I am not your fiancée," Lillian stated clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "I never was." "A misunderstanding," Thornton replied smoothly. "One we can resolve on our journey back to Missouri." Lucas's hand tightened around Lillian's beneath the table. But he remained silent, allowing her to speak for herself as they had agreed. "There is no misunderstanding," Lillian continued steadily. "I refused your proposal in Missouri, just as I refuse it now. I will not be returning with you today or ever." A flash of anger crossed Thornton's face before he masked it with a condescending smile. "You're upset, clearly. This man," he gestured dismissively toward Lucas, "has filled your head with false promises. But your place is in Missouri, Lillian. Your future is with me." Judge Hollister rapped his knuckles sharply on the table. "Mr. Thornton, I have before me a letter written in your hand that contains clear threats against Miss Norwood and Mr. Blackett. Such threats constitute a criminal offense in Wyoming Territory." "A private correspondence has been misconstrued," Thornton countered smoothly. "I merely expressed my concern for Lillian's well-being and my desire to see her safely home." "The law sees it differently," the judge replied firmly. I have issued an order of protection forbidding you from approaching or contacting Miss Norwood without her explicit consent. Sheriff Davis will enforce this order with all necessary means." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Thornton's face as he glanced at the sheriff and the growing crowd of townspeople visible through the hotel windows. "This is absurd. I've traveled halfway across the country to retrieve my—" "I am not yours," Lillian interrupted, rising to her feet. Every eye in the room fixed on her as she stood straight and proud. "I never was, Richard, and I never will be. The answer I gave you in Missouri hasn't changed. I will not marry you." "You little fool," Thornton snarled, his mask of civility slipping. "Do you think this backwater judge and small-town sheriff can stop me? Do you know who I am? What resources I command?" Lucas stood then, his imposing presence drawing all attention. "We know exactly who you are, Thornton. A coward who threatens women. A man who uses his wealth to bully others into submission. But you've miscalculated badly this time. Is that so?" Thornton's voice dripped with disdain. "And how have I miscalculated, Mr. Blackett?" "You assumed Lillian was alone and vulnerable," Lucas stated simply. "She isn't. She has me. She has this entire community standing behind her." As if to emphasize his point, several of the townspeople who had been watching through the windows now entered the dining room, filling the space with their solid presence. The message was unmistakable. Lillian Norwood was under their protection. Thornton's gaze darted around the room, clearly reassessing his position. His hired guns shifted uncomfortably, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This changes nothing," Thornton declared, though his tone lacked conviction. "Lillian belongs in Missouri. Her parents would have wanted— My parents would have wanted me to be safe and happy," Lillian cut in, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "I am both here, Richard. For the first time since they died, I have found a place where I belong. A home." Her gaze met Lucas's briefly, drawing strength from the pride and love she saw reflected there. "I will not leave Redemption Creek. Not for you, not for anyone." A tense silence followed her declaration. Thornton's face flushed with anger, but the presence of so many witnesses clearly deterred him from the outburst he might otherwise have unleashed. Judge Hollister seized the moment to push forward the legal document before him. "This order requires your signature, Mr. Thornton. It formally acknowledges that you have been informed of the protection order and agree to abide by its terms." "And if I refuse to sign," Thornton challenged, "then you'll be spending time in my jail," Sheriff Davis answered bluntly. "Contempt of court is a serious offense, Mr. Thornton, even for a man of your resources." The implied threat was clear. Whatever influence Thornton might wield elsewhere, it held no sway here in Redemption Creek. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, with no allies to call upon. For a long, tense moment, he seemed to weigh his options. Finally, with barely contained fury, he snatched the quill from the judge's hand and scrawled his signature on the document. "This isn't over," he muttered as he thrust the paper back at Judge Hollister. "Yes, it is," Lucas countered firmly. "Lillian has made her choice. The law has spoken. There is nothing more for you here, Thornton." The defeated rage in Thornton's eyes as he looked at Lillian sent a chill through her, but she held his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. "You'll regret this," he said softly. "When the novelty wears off and he tires of you, you'll remember what you threw away." "The only thing I'm throwing away is my fear of you," Lillian replied with quiet dignity. "Goodbye, Richard." With a final venomous glare, Thornton turned and stalked from the room, his hired men following in his wake. The tension in the dining room dissipated gradually as the sheriff followed to ensure Thornton and his men actually departed. Judge Hollister gathered his papers, nodding with satisfaction. "Well done, Miss Norwood. Standing up to a bully takes considerable courage." "I had help," Lillian said, her gaze moving gratefully around the room at the townspeople who had rallied to her support. Lucas's arm slipped around her waist, a public declaration of his feelings that would have been unthinkable just months ago. "You were magnificent," he murmured for her ears alone. "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." The warmth of his praise washed through her, chasing away the last tendrils of fear. Richard Thornton might rage and threaten, but he was powerless now. She was free of him at last. As they left the hotel, the The gathered townspeople offered congratulations and expressions of support. Lillian was overwhelmed by the genuine care shown by people who had once viewed her with suspicion. "See," Lucas said as they mounted their horses for the ride back to Evergreen. "I told you, Redemption Creek protects its own." Lillian smiled at him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Take me home, Lucas." The word home had never felt so right on her lips. Evergreen was home now, not just a place of employment or temporary shelter, but truly home. And the man riding beside her was the reason why. Sheriff Davis rode out to Evergreen the following morning to inform them that Richard Thornton and his men had departed on the eastbound stage at dawn. "Bought tickets all the way back to Missouri," the sheriff reported with satisfaction. "I made sure they got on the stage myself." The news brought a profound sense of closure to Lillian. For the first time since fleeing Missouri, she could truly believe that her past was behind her. The future stretched before her, bright with possibility. That evening, as the last rays of sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Lucas led Lillian to a small rise overlooking the ranch. A blanket had been spread on the grass, and a simple picnic awaited them: bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine. "What's the occasion?" Lillian asked as Lucas helped her settle on the blanket. "Freedom," he replied simply. "Your freedom from Thornton. Our freedom to move forward without that shadow hanging over us." He poured wine into 2 glasses, handing one to Lillian before raising his own in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," she echoed, sipping the sweet wine as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They ate in companionable silence, watching as night gradually claimed the land. Evergreen spread below them, the windows of the ranch house glowing with warm light. The outbuildings and corrals forming familiar shapes in the gathering darkness. When they had finished eating, Lucas cleared away the remains of their picnic before rejoining Lillian on the blanket. His expression was uncharacteristically nervous as he took her hand in his. "I told you once that when Thornton was gone, truly gone, I would ask you something properly," he began, his voice lower and more intense than usual, with no distractions and no fear clouding the moment. Lillian's heart began to race as she realized what was coming. "Yes, you did say that." Lucas took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lillian Norwood, when you came into my life that day in the marketplace, I had no idea how completely you would change everything. I was existing, not living running Evergreen because it was my responsibility, not because it brought me joy." He squeezed her hand gently. "You brought light back into my world, your courage, your kindness, your determination to build a new life despite everything you'd endured. I admired you from the beginning, but somewhere along the way, admiration became something much deeper." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I love you, Lillian. I want to build a life with you, not as my housekeeper, or even as the woman I'm courting, but as my wife, my partner in everything." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my mother's," he explained softly. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman who brought the same light to my life that she brought to my father's." With trembling fingers, he removed the ring from its velvet nest. "Lillian Norwood, will you marry me? Will you make Evergreen your home, not just for now, but forever?" Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks as she looked from the beautiful ring to the face of the man she had come to love with all her heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching with emotion. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, pure, powerful, illuminating. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. "It's perfect," Lillian murmured, admiring how the pearl caught the starlight. "Like you," Lucas replied, cupping her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "Perfect for me in every way." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as Lillian wound her arms around his neck, pouring all her love and joy into the embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Soon," Lillian replied, unwilling to wait long to begin their life together officially. "Before the first snow?" Lucas smiled, clearly pleased by her eagerness. Judge Hollister could perform the ceremony, perhaps in the garden at Evergreen, while the last flowers are still in bloom. That sounds perfect, Lillian agreed, already envisioning the day they would pledge their lives to each other beneath the vast Wyoming sky that had witnessed their journey from strangers to beloved partners. As they lay back on the blanket to gaze at the stars, Lucas's arm around her shoulders and her head resting on his chest, Lillian marveled at the twisted path that had led her to this moment. If she hadn't been falsely accused of stealing that day in the marketplace, if Lucas hadn't stepped forward to defend her. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "How strange life's journey can be," she replied thoughtfully. 6 months ago, I was alone and afraid, with nothing but uncertainty ahead of me. Now I'm here, with you, planning our wedding. Lucas pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures," he observed. "If you hadn't faced such hardship in Missouri, you might never have come west. And if you hadn't seen through Holloway's scheme that day, we might never have met," Lillian added, lacing her fingers with his. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Lucas said with quiet certainty. "Some connections are meant to be, regardless of the circumstances." The romantic notion warmed Lillian's heart. "Is that what we are? Meant to be?" "Without a doubt," Lucas replied, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. "From the moment I saw you in that marketplace, something in me recognized something in you, as if my soul had been waiting for yours without me even knowing it." Lillian smiled at the poetic sentiment from this typically pragmatic man. "I never believed in such things before." "And now?" Lucas prompted. "Now I believe in many things I once thought impossible," she admitted softly. "Second chances, new beginnings, a love strong enough to heal old wounds and brave enough to face whatever comes." Beneath the star-strewn Wyoming sky, with the solid warmth of the man she loved beside her, and the ring that symbolized their future glinting on her finger, Lillian Norwood knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. 6 weeks later, on a perfect autumn day with the aspens turning gold on the surrounding hillsides, Lillian Norwood became Lillian Blackett in a simple ceremony in the garden at Evergreen. Judge Hollister officiated with the ranch hands, several townspeople, and even Mrs. Peterson in attendance to witness their vows. Lillian wore a gown of ivory satin and lace that Mrs. Fleming had created especially for the occasion, with tiny pearls echoing the one in her engagement ring. Lucas, looking more handsome than ever in a new black suit, had tears in his eyes as he slipped the gold wedding band onto her finger to join his mother's ring. "I take you, Lillian, to be my wife," he vowed, his voice strong and clear, despite the emotion evident in his expression. "To cherish and protect, to honor and respect, to laugh with and cry with, from this day forward until my last breath." Lillian's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated similar vows, promising to love and support Lucas through whatever life might bring their way. When Judge Hollister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests seemed to echo across the valley. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed, with tables set up in the yard and abundant food and drink for all. Miguel and several of the hands had fashioned a dance floor near the barn, and as the afternoon sun began to lower toward the horizon, Lucas led his bride onto it for their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Blackett," he murmured as they moved together to the music provided by a fiddler from town. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Lillian replied truthfully, still adjusting to her new name and the profound sense of belonging it represented. Lucas's arms tightened around her waist. "This is just the beginning," he promised. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." As dusk fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the continuing celebration. Lillian found herself grateful for each person who had come to share their joy, from Miguel, who had become a trusted friend, to Mrs. Peterson, who had embraced Lillian with genuine affection despite their rocky beginning. Victoria Carter had not attended, to no one's surprise. Word had reached Evergreen that she had set her cap for a wealthy cattle buyer from Denver, apparently having decided that Wyoming no longer offered suitable prospects for her ambitions. When the last guests had departed and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Lucas swept Lillian into his arms to carry her across the threshold of their home, not as housekeeper and employer, but as husband and wife. The master bedroom, which Lillian had never entered during her time as housekeeper, had been transformed in preparation for her arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new linens adorned the large bed, and a vase of late-blooming wildflowers stood on the dressing table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackett," Lucas murmured, setting her gently on her feet. "To our room, in our house, on our ranch." The emphasis on "our" brought tears to Lillian's eyes. After so many years of having nothing to call her own, of living in others' spaces and working for others' benefit, the sense of shared ownership was overwhelming. "Our home," she echoed softly, reaching up to caress her husband's face. "Our life together." With infinite tenderness, Lucas bent to kiss her a kiss that spoke of promise and passion, of a future filled with both joy and challenge, but always faced together. As the night deepened around Evergreen Ranch, a full moon rose above the distant mountains, casting silver light across the land that would witness the unfolding of their shared story. A story that had begun with an accusation in a marketplace and would continue through all the seasons of their lives together. "I'll pay twice over and take her home," Lucas had said on that fateful day, with no idea how prophetic his words would prove to be. For he had indeed taken Lillian home, not just to Evergreen, but to his heart, and in doing so, he had given her the most precious gift of all, a place where she truly belonged. In the years that followed, Evergreen Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Lillian brought new energy and ideas to the operation, establishing a thriving kitchen garden that eventually expanded into a small orchard, while Lucas continued to build the cattle business into one of the most respected in the territory. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Lillian's mother, arrived a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy girl with Lucas's hazel eyes and Lillian's fair hair. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James, named for Lucas's father. As their family grew, so did their happiness, each child bringing new dimensions of joy to their lives. Redemption Creek changed too, growing from a small frontier settlement into a proper town with a school, a church, and eventually a railroad spur that connected it to the larger world. Lucas served on the town council for many years, while Lillian became involved in establishing the first library, donating many of the books herself. Richard Thornton never returned to Wyoming Territory. They heard through distant connections that he had eventually married a wealthy widow in St. Louis and focused his energies on political ambitions rather than personal vendettas. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Lucas and Lillian would often sit together on the porch of Evergreen, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. In those peaceful moments, they would sometimes reflect on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, an accusation of theft, a moment of intervention, and the simple words that had changed both their lives forever. "I'll pay twice over and take her home." "It was the best decision I ever made," Lucas would say, his arm around his wife's shoulders, his heart full of gratitude for the life they had built together. And Lillian, leaning into the embrace of the man who had seen her true worth when others saw only vulnerability, would smile and reply, "It was the luckiest day of my life." In the end, it wasn't luck or fate or chance that sustained them. Through the years it was choice, the choice to stand together against adversity, the choice to build a home founded on respect and love. The choice, renewed each day, to see the best in each other and to face life's challenges as partners. From an accusation in a marketplace to a lifetime of shared joy and purpose, it was a journey neither could have imagined on that fateful day when their paths first crossed. But it was a journey they traveled willingly, hand in hand, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone.